Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity from the Maine Department of Education. My name is Joe Schmidt, and I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the department. Today, I am very excited, and I know I say happy all the time, but I'm going to go with very excited because this is, I think, a special day, that we have Dr. Paula McAvoy from NC State University, and formerly of the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where I first got to meet her and work with her. She's here today. She's the co-author of the book, The Political Classroom. And I think, as I've told others at different points, in my previous position in Madison, Wisconsin, we did grant work with UW and secured work where we worked with Dr. McAvoy in talking about structured academic controversies. And these are the topics we're going to go over today. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over and then formally introduce Dr. Paula McAvoy from NC State University.
Great. Thanks, Joe, and thanks for having me, and nice to meet you all or see you all in Maine. And I'm going to just, I'll just say as a little bit of introduction, I guess, that I did meet Joe in Wisconsin when I was at UW Wisconsin, but I began my career, I don't even know how many years ago at this point, as a high school social studies teacher in California. So I taught social studies for 10 years before I went back and got my PhD. And now I've been doing, so I'm a professor here at NC State, but I also do a lot of professional development with teachers around the country. And I'm learning to do webinars. So as many of you are learning to do online teaching. So we're going to talk today about classroom discussion, and what I love about classroom discussion is the face-to-face interaction with people. But we're going to do the best that I can here to get you sort of ready for the day in which we get to be face-to-face again. And I do think there are strategies that are adaptable to online learning, but I'm mostly thinking, as Joe said, let's start getting people thinking for the time in which we get to have face-to-face discussions again. So I'm going to share my screen, and Joe, you just let me know when something looks wonky on your end, and I'll.
You're doing great so far.
Okay. And so my first question was, who are you and where are you? But you've already answered that in the discussion, so we'll just charge right through that. But what I'd like you to do in the chat is answer this question or fill in this sentence. When I think about engaging my students in political discussions, I feel blank because blank. So you can just write in the chat, I feel blank because blank. So I feel, let me see if I can even see my chat. See, this is where I can't see the chat. No, how do I do that? If I stop, oops, I don't want to do that. I feel like there must be a way for me to see the chat as this happens. Found it. Okay. So what do people say? I feel nervous. Nervous, anxiety, uncomfortable. Yep. Yeah. Nice, David. So I hope, it sounds like David maybe is able to get good discussions. Frozen because my passion. Yep. Okay. Some worry about how to keep your own passionate political views in check. Okay. So a lot of nervousness, a lot of discomfort, anxiety, so the common words, which is all perfectly understandable given today's political climate. But, oh wait, there's a couple more I want to see. Pressured. A parent usually comes in to complain. Okay, so let's, and hard to bite my tongue, yes. Okay, so let's, as we move forward, hopefully we'll talk about some of the ways that we can kind of decrease that anxiety a little bit, and, but it's perfectly understandable. And I'll just say now, if you want to, as I go through this talk, if you have questions that come up about anything that I say, please feel free to write them in the chat, and Joe's gonna keep an eye on that, and it will interrupt me if there's something that needs to be addressed, but I also have it up now so I can see a little bit. So the agenda that I have for today is to talk a little bit about why we called the book this a political classroom, and why we think that we should be bringing, we, meaning Diana Hess and I, my co-author, would like to encourage more teachers to have political discussions in the classroom. And the reality is that lots of research shows, and your responses suggest, that a lot of people are hesitant, a lot of teachers are hesitant to bring political issues into the classroom for many of the reasons you identified. You worry about parents, worry about what you're gonna say, worried about what kids are gonna say, and how can we make them sort of fair and productive given our political climate. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, and engage you in a little bit of reflection on what makes a good discussion, and then talk about this particular discussion strategy that I think is a nice way to get students involved in academic in discussion, and it's called a structured academic controversy, and it's sometimes referred to as the SAC. And then at the end, I have some more resources to share about structuring discussions, and then we'll end with some questions. But that's the general game plan for the next hour or so. And actually, I should keep an eye on my clock. Okay, so this book, The Political Classroom, Evidence and Ethics in Democratic Education, that I wrote with Diana Hess, we chose the title, The Political Classroom, as a way to even sort of push people a little bit. A lot of people think, oh, you shouldn't have, classrooms shouldn't be political, but we are encouraging teachers, especially social studies teachers, to think of their classrooms as political spaces. And by this we mean classrooms that engage students in discussions about the question, how should we live together? And so how should we live together is the question of democracy. That's what we're trying to do in a democratic society, is decide how we're going to live together. And how should we live together? Questions involve all sorts of policy level issues, like, should our state require masks? Is a how should we live together in public? A current how should we live together questions. Who should be the next president of the United States? Should we be doing more to address climate change? So all of these sort of policy levels about what to do about our current problems are how should we live together questions. And so helping kids engage in these questions is part of making a classroom political. This is kind of political in a good way, we would say. Okay, now the challenge is that in our current climate, it sort of feels like we don't want to live together. It feels like we kind of don't like each other very much, and that this makes it very difficult to have a democracy. And so just as we are all aware of how politically polarized we are, but just to make it extra clear, here's some evidence about affective polarization. And so political polarization, I could talk for an hour about why it's happening, and there's many interesting reasons. But one way to think about political polarization is that it's the behavior of our elected officials. So it's Congress is polarized, the parties are polarized, but the reality is that that's all true, but it's also that we ourselves as citizens in the United States are becoming polarized in the way that we think about one another. So affective polarization is our feelings for people who disagree with us, towards people who disagree with us, or feelings about our sort of political others, or people on the other side of our political views. And so Pew has been surveying people for a number of years about how they feel, how Democrats feel about Republicans and how Republicans feel about Democrats. And so you can see here from 1994 to 2016, both the Republicans and Democrats have increasing animosity towards the other side. They have a very unfavorable view of the other party. And we do this at about equal rates. So as you know, it's not that one party is just open-minded and warm and generous and the other isn't. It's that we both perceive the other as being, you know, we have equal animosity towards each other. And when you ask another question of, do you think the other party is a threat to the nation's well-being, you see at about equal rates, Democrats and Republicans think that the other party is actually dangerous to the country. And so if you think that the other side is dangerous to the country, then it's very difficult to do what you need to do in democracy, which is get something done. So you have to decide what to do. But if the other side's views are dangerous, then it doesn't seem like a good people that you want to work with. Someone in the chat is saying, is this different today? It's no. And so this is the most recent that I could find on Pew, just taken in April 2020, so last month. Do you think divisions between Republicans and Democrats today are increasing, decreasing, or about the same? And a wide majority, 65%, think that our divisions are increasing between the parties or staying the same, and only fewer than 10% think that we are getting any better at living together. And then, so if we think about this, so the political polarization is not new. It's been growing since the early 1980s. I mean, depending on how you count, what story you tell, but for many years, this is not this administration or even the previous administration's doing. But the reality is that the students in your classrooms have only known a democracy that is seeped in this animosity towards one another. So they've only know a very divided, hyper-partisan political culture. And this is not good for young people. It's not good for our future. Oh, my screen is just going willy-nilly. So this is from the World Values Survey, which is a survey, global survey, and the trends that we're feeling in the United States are, of course, as we see them playing out in many countries around the world: hyperpolarization, trends towards authoritarianism, income inequality, all sorts of things that are related to one another. But so when we survey in the 2019 World Values Survey of people living in democracies, if you compare the responses to the silent generation, which is the oldest living generation, and the millennials, who's the youngest voting generation, 16% of the silent generation responded to the question, is democracy good, very good, bad, or very bad? 16% said bad or very bad of the silent generation. And 24% of millennials said bad or very bad. Same survey, electing leaders is unimportant. And if we look at the boomers compared to the millennials, 14% of baby boomers say electing leaders is unimportant, and 26% of millennials. So what you're seeing is a trend globally of younger people having their doubts that democracy is a good idea to begin with. And so there's a movement away from commitment to democratic values. So this is something that we as social studies teachers should be concerned with. And then this paper that just came out about a month or so ago, in American Political Science Review, finds that most US voters, and I won't go into the whole study, but they were looking at voting patterns and in an experimental design. These researchers find that most US voters are partisans first and Democrats only second, meaning that we're more concerned that our party wins, that we prioritize the party winning over protection of democratic values and institutions. And so we're willing to support a candidate who I identifies with my party, even if that candidate is promoting values or policies that would undermine democracy itself. And the people who are willing to switch are generally the people who are less partisan. So meaning, if I'm an independent or I don't strongly identify with a party, I'm more likely to protect democratic values and less committed to the party. So that is just interesting new findings that have come out.
Dr. McAvoy, just really quick, there was a question a second ago, and I think you just answered that. There's two questions, but one with that was talking about you were referencing some 2016 information, and it was kind of like, that hasn't changed, right? So in the new data that's showing that that's a changing piece, is probably still continuing.
Right, and my next slide that was from April 2020 shows the same sort of similar trends.
And there's a question in there from Neil asking, it can be hard when a teacher is saying, like, this is constitutional or this is not constitutional, and people take that as you attacking a political figure. Is there any sort of response to that, or is that maybe a better left at a different point?
Right. Well, I mean, right. So this is that our facts are partisan now, right? So people are we can't, this is one challenge, that we can't sort of agree on policy action because we can't agree what the problem is in the first place. But it's, I think in moments like that, as much as possible, we have to be, have the sort of presence of mind to say, well, let's make sure we're let's look back at the Constitution and see. And the Constitution is always open to interpretation, and so and always changing. So, but that question speaks to a larger problem of that just saying climate change is real, for example, can that can be heard as a partisan statement. And I think helping students understand the partisan climate and the partisan motivation behind some of these divisions, really understanding the role of parties in a democracy, and starting with some foundational ideas of what democracy is. This is really important before we start jumping into political issues. So that's a big thorny, that's a short answer to a huge question. Are there certain issues that seem to be more polarizing? For sure. So the wedge issues that tend to divide parties, like currently healthcare, abortion, even, well, I won't say taxation, but gun policy, all of the biggest hot button issues, the ones that seem hardest to bring into your classroom. But it's really, we're in a climate that nearly every issue now is being sort of parsed out on partisan grounds. And I think the current climate of COVID is showing it perfectly that, that mask wearing now, a public health issue, is being mapped onto a partisan landscape, or the idea that when we should open up a state is turning into a partisan issue. And so Joe and I, having lived in Wisconsin, is watching Wisconsin struggle with this, and it's happening in North Carolina, everywhere. So I think one thing in other professional development that I do, there's a question of, do we want kids to leave our classrooms with a stronger partisan identity? Is that something that we want as an outcome for kids, that they understand where their views fit into the partisan landscape? Or do we want them to be a little more critical, have like a critical distance between themselves and the parties, so to be able to look critically at what both parties are doing? So that's a question of what are our aims when we are in social studies classrooms. But I think, encouraging students to over-attach to parties is looking like a more and more problematic thing to do. So, and then from the evidence.
And there's one other one that I think, referencing a specific data point you just had about the younger people kind of having less trust in that. And Neil again kind of asks, is that maybe something that changes when that older generation now, do we have any resources or data that would say that they maybe felt that way? Is that a younger person piece that they grew out of that? Or is there any data to say it's actually just shifting in those different generations?
The World Value Survey has been around for quite some time, and my recollection of reading this report was that this was a change in the younger generation, that older generations had strong commitments to democracy as young people and as older people, and that young people seem to be breaking there's a more a frustrated reaction to democracy.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna charge on. Okay, so all that to say that it's difficult to live together these days, but our classrooms are places in which young people do seem to be some young people probably show up to your classrooms quite partisan and have very strong partisan commitments, and many others have a general idea about where they might fall within a partisan landscape, and some have no idea. And even if they're strong partisans, evidence suggests that they don't always know where all the issues, it's not that they've always studied all the issues, that they've sort of inherited partisan identity from community and family. And so our classrooms are a space in which we can sort of slow down our political thinking and get students engaged in the issues and really investigating sort of what are the issues facing our country today. And we can do that through allowing them to discuss the current issues. But when I work with teachers around discussion and my own students, teachers that I work with here at NC State, the concept discussion turns out to be kind of tricky. That a lot of people disagree about what a good discussion is, or what are we trying to accomplish when we have a discussion in the classroom. And so I want to spend a little time talking about, what are good discussions. So in the chat, what I'd like you to do is imagine that you were asked to go into a colleague's classroom and determine whether a good discussion was happening. What would you look for? So in this chat, could you put, what are some things that you would look for to say, oh yeah, that's a good discussion? So 2 votes for respect. Yep, oh good. Talking more than the students, talking more than the teacher. Balanced participation, so that you're seeing another, I assume that means, Leslie, a lot of participation, that it's not just 5 students talking a lot. Yes, Leslie says. Good. Questions, debate, non-judgment, active engagement. Great. Right, so a lot of students talking to each other, listening to each other, respecting each other, sticking to the facts, sticking to the issues, and lots of engagement, that it's not the domination by the teacher or dominated by the students. So that's fantastic. Okay, so let's keep all that in mind. And I'm going to take you into a classroom via video here. And this is a course called Justice that is at Harvard. It's one of the most popular classes at Harvard University. And the professor in charge is philosopher Michael Sandel, who's a political philosopher. And the topic of this class is libertarianism. And so I want to tell you, so I'll take you over to the next slide. I think it won't start. So this class takes place in this huge auditorium here in Harvard. So there's about 1,000 people in the lecture hall. And then the students are also in discussion section, face-to-face discussion sections, and there's also an active online discussion board with this course. And I'll just say, as a resource, all of what you're about to see and all of the lectures for the class have been packaged and they're all free online. And so they take you through it's really a great course in political philosophy. And the question of what is a just society is basically the overarching question for the class. And so what I'm going to show you is about a 4-minute clip of a class that's on libertarianism. And the question basically is, libertarianism the right view of justice? And prior to the class, Michael Sandel had asked for volunteers. So they had already learned about libertarianism, they've read about libertarianism, they've been in their discussion sections, and then we're coming back to the question, so is this the right view of justice? And 3 students, or Sandel asked, would anyone like to volunteer to defend libertarianism? And so the 3 students you're going to see standing with Michael Sandel are 3 volunteers. Okay, so ready?
That they repay by paying taxes. Who wants to respond to the first one? The poor need the money more. All right, and you're John. John. All right, John. Let's see here. I'll hold it.
All right. The poor need the money more. That's quite obvious. I could use the money. I certainly wouldn't mind if Bill Gates gave me $1 million. I mean, I'd take 1,000. But at some point, you have to understand that the benefits of redistribution of wealth don't justify the initial violation of the property right. If you look at the argument, the poor need the money more, at no point in that argument do you contradict the fact that we've extrapolated from agreed upon principles that people own themselves. We've extrapolated that people have property rights. And so whether or not it would be a good thing or a nice thing, or even a necessary thing for the survival of some people, we don't see that justifies the violation of the right that we've logically extrapolated.
Good. Okay.
And so that also, I mean, there still exists this institution of like individual philanthropy. Milton Friedman makes this argument.
All right, so Bill Gates can give to charity if he wants to.
Right.
But it would still be wrong to coerce him.
Exactly.
To meet the needs of the poor.
Exactly.
Are the 2 of you happy with that reply? Anything to add? All right. Go ahead, Julie.
I think, Julia, yes.
Julia.
I think I could also add, I guess I could add that there's a difference between needing something and deserving something. I mean, in an ideal society, everyone's needs will be met, but here we're arguing, what do we deserve as a society?
And the poor don't deserve the benefits that would flow from taxing Michael Jordan to help them.
Based on what we've come up with here, I don't think you deserve something like that.
All right, let me push you a little bit on that, Julia. The victims of Hurricane Katrina are in desperate need of help. Would you say that they don't deserve help that would come from the federal government through taxation?
Okay, that's a difficult question. I think this is a case where they need help, not deserve it. But I think, again, if you hit a certain level of requirements to reach sustenance, you're going to need help. Like if you don't have food or a place to live, that's a case of need.
So need is one thing and desert is another.
Exactly.
All right. Who would like to reply? Yes.
Going back to the first point that he made about the property rights of the individual, the property rights are established and enforced by the government, which is a democratic government, and we have representatives who enforce those rights. If you live in a society that operates under those rules, then it should be up to the government to decide how those resources that come out through taxation are distributed, because it is through the consent of the government. If you disagree with it, you don't have to live in that society where that operates.
All right, good. So, and tell me your name.
Raul?
Raul is pointing out, actually, Raul is invoking point number 2. If the taxation is by the consent of the governed, it's not coerced, it's legitimate. Bill Gates and Michael Jordan are citizens of the United States. They get to vote for Congress. They get to vote their policy convictions, just like everybody else. Who'd like to take that one on? John?
Basically, what the libertarians are objecting to in this case is the middle 80% deciding what the top 10% are doing for the bottom 10%.
Wait, John.
No,
Majority. Don't you believe in democracy?
well, right, but at
Don't
some
you believe
point,
in the, I mean, you say 80%, 10% majority. Majority rule is what? Majority.
exactly, but
In a democracy. Aren't you for democracy?
yes, I'm for democracy.
I'll give Sandel the last word there. And so let me, wait, so Joe, do I stop share to get, no, I can go to the poll. So what I'd like you to do is, you should see a poll here. So if that were your colleague and he had, and Michael Sandel had asked you, do you think I'm having a good discussion? How would you rate that? You can say 0, sorry, Michael, that was not a discussion, or you can say it was a poor discussion, 2, an average discussion, or 3, that was a good discussion. So let's weigh in. How many people are in the room now, Joe? Just like 8.
You have 9 eligible voters, although I saw Sonia voted in the chat room.
Okay, I see Sonia. Agreeing with 3. And 1 more. Okay. Okay, so I think that's good. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So Joe, if you could give everyone the ability to unmute themselves using your Zoom powers. So we have a range here. So one person said that wasn't a discussion, one said it was poor, and then 5 people say it was either okay or good. So could we start with one of the 2 people that said either it's not a discussion or it's a poor discussion, would you be willing to unmute yourself and explain what your reasoning was?
I said it wasn't a discussion. I think he threw out a question there and then played devil's advocate against it, but I don't think it was necessarily to really hear people's mindsets. It was a structured argument.
Okay. So what you saw is a lot of structure, maybe too much structure is what you're saying.
I would suggest it wasn't discussion because everybody just stated how they felt and there wasn't any interaction except for by the leader.
Right. Okay. So you're noticing that a lot of the student talk is going the teacher is commenting on nearly all the student comments. He's either paraphrasing it or restating it or challenging the student.
Correct.
So you're saying that, okay, great. How about the people who said either average or good? Would someone want to say why they thought it was average or good? Defend in the true political philosophy.
Well, since you saw that I voted 3, so you know that I thought it was a good discussion.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good discussion because they weren't yelling, they weren't shouting at each other, and I thought that he was kind of encouraging them to, he being the professor, encouraging them to dig a little deeper, I guess, to think about what they wanted to say. But the other people like David and Leslie have both had really good points.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you are modeling very respectful discussion as well. So you're saying, well, I saw good discussion norms, and you saw that the discussion was deepening thinking. So the discussion, especially between the professor's job, what he was trying to do there was push them a little bit on their thinking, right, and deepen. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. And anyone else on the 2 and 3 camp want to say what you saw that was particularly good?
It seemed like a really great way to get to a better understanding. I said it was 2 average okay, but it did get the feeling as though it wasn't really, it wasn't a discussion among equals, right? It seemed as though at least the professor had the idea in mind that libertarianism maybe wasn't the best solution. So I don't know if it's a good discussion when both sides aren't open to having their minds change.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah. So you're right. So Sandel is not the professor. He set this up as the defenders of libertarianism versus the critiques of libertarianism. And he's sort of trying to play that out. Did any of the people, did the 0 or 1s, Jessica or is it David, want to respond to the 2 views the views that said, no, I think that was pretty good?
I'm unmuting myself, and forgive me if you hear background noise. I'm out on my deck and my neighbors are having a huge party right now and the cops just came. But I will just say I said it was pretty average. There were questions and, people were looking for clarification and it was pretty civil.
Okay, good. So it's interesting. I think that this is this video I like because it pulls out a range of views, right? So it's always, some people like it and some people don't like it, and you're liking it. It illustrates how sort of misunderstood, not necessarily misunderstood, but how complicated the definition or what discussion is in the first place looks like. And so what you kind of saw, one way to think about what we saw is that was almost a fishbowl discussion, right? So it was not a discussion of 1,000 people, but it was a discussion of sort of 4 students and the teachers modeling a type of philosophic engagement. But you are right that it was not a free-flowing discussion, that Michael Sandel knows exactly where that discussion is going, and he knows where he wants that discussion to go. And so it's not that, so he's holding on to a lot of control, but he's also in a room of 1,000 people. So the context in which we're having a discussion also matters in how we measure what a good discussion is. So thank you for participating in our mini little discussion about discussion. So let me just say that what you're all sort of talking about is that this thing called discussion sits at the intersection of 2 axes. This is how I view discussion. And so are we able to still see my screen? Just check. Okay. So on one axis, you want some level of disagreement. So discussions aren't fun or interesting or even very educational, I think, if we all just agree with each other. And they're not that great if there's so much conflict that we can't hear each other anymore. So what you're trying to do as a teacher is find those questions, find those structures that get students able to respectfully and productively disagree. So we're trying to unearth disagreement. when I did that poll, I picked the video because I know people will disagree about that particular video. And I do the poll so that we can show that you can now see, oh, we disagree. Because if we don't know that we disagree, if I just moved on, we could all assume that probably everyone agreed with us. But the poll, just that little visual, gives you a quick display, like we don't agree with one another. So let's talk through our disagreements. And then on the other axis is that there's a level of teacher control. If you're going to have a discussion, the teacher has to give up some control. You don't know what students are going to say, but you don't want so much control that it's not fun or exciting anymore, which is what some of you are pointing out, that looked like too much control by Michael Sandel. And I'll forgive that amount of control given the room of 1,000 people. But what I see when I study classroom discussion is or watch student teachers, is that what they think discussion is really what I would call an interactive lecture. It's the teacher says something, maybe asks a recall kind of question, and then responds back, and all the talk goes student, teacher, and it's not even that open of a question to begin with. And then on the other extreme, was that a question?
I was going to ask, do you mind if I ask you a clarification?
No, go ahead, yeah.
When you do this presentation or similar, do you find that same scatter across your poll with everybody you do it with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I usually, again, I've done it, I have a whole hour activity where we look at 4 different videos, and each video kind of shows a different angle on discussion, to try to get at what are the things we care about, what are we looking for with discussion. But and one of them is just an interactive lecture where it becomes very clear. And a lot of people feel embarrassed because they immediately recognize themselves as like, oh, that's what I do in the classroom. That's my primary discussion activity. And then on the extreme of teacher control is the teacher who gives up all control, doesn't really know where the discussion is going, but is just happy that some people are talking and calls that discussion. And it doesn't feel particularly productive. And the question's not clear. We're shooting from the hip, there's all sorts of issues with that. And so discussion, what you're trying to do for when I as a teacher prepare for discussion is think about how am I going to bring out the disagreement, and then how am I going to structure that disagreement? And so those are the 2 things I'm working with when I'm thinking of preparing. So sort of to sum up this idea, which is we've been you put it in the chat and what we've been talking about, that a discussion needs a discussable question. There has to be something open and up for discussion that has multiple points of view. As someone mentioned, like if all the answers are known, then it's not really a discussion. That there's some shared materials that we're working from. So in that class, they've done about a week's worth of work on libertarianism. That was not their first introduction to libertarianism, but that we're getting students on a common plane, the earlier question about what's constitutional or not, students need to be prepared for discussion. And so we need a common starting point, like what's in the Constitution, or what is the Second Amendment, before we start talking about the Second Amendment, things like that. And that we're aiming for students to talk to each other, which is a weakness of the one we just saw, but that a lot of you identified as something that you want when you have discussions. You're aiming for full participation, and that there are norms. So these are all the sort of synthesis of what you've all came up with as well. And I think, so in the professional development, I do 100% of the time, my main message is discussions need structure. So a lot of teachers want to just throw out a question like, what do you think? And what do you think we don't know what to do with what do you think when you're a student in a classroom. So we need to really think more about how we're going to engage the disagreement of a discussion. And we do that with structures. So Joe invited me, and this is one that I've worked with a lot, this is like a discussion protocol called Structured Academic Controversy, or SAC. And we're getting short on time, but I'm going to charge ahead if this is all right. So
a quick question for you, Dr. McAvoy. One,
yeah.
Will we have access to the presentation and/or then the videos? The videos are all embedded.
The videos are embedded. The challenge is that to email it becomes a huge PowerPoint. So I can send you what I did in a prior one is I just put the link on the slide and then you can follow the link.
Because somebody's asking for the 4 videos. So yeah, I can go ahead and I can make that work on my end if you can get that.
Okay, we'll work on
I
it.
definitely don't want you to rush for any time. I think we're having a good discussion, so don't feel any pressure on that. And if you have something, I completely understand, but don't rush for my time.
Okay, great. I'll try. I try to be on time, but I might go a little over. Okay, so structured academic controversy is a strategy that was developed in the 1970s as a cooperative learning activity or way to do. It's like falls into the cooperative learning camp. It's not a debate, although it looks at times like parts of it look like a debate. So what I'm going to do is take you to streetlaw.org, which is if you're not familiar with street law and you teach civics, this is a great resource for you. They're mainly main point of familiarity is they have all sorts of landmark Supreme Court cases written for a high school and middle school level. So they're synthesized for they're like a nice 2-pager on landmark cases, and then they have lots of discussion strategies that they use with teaching about law. Now, the structured academic controversy they call deliberations. So I tell you that because when you go to their website, don't look up structured academic controversies, you want to look for deliberations. So here's a snippet from their website. I'm going to show you the video in this resource bundle. These are all free, as you can tell. And then here are some of the structured academic controversy materials that they have ready to go for your high school classroom. So should the federal government pass an assault weapons ban? Should voting be compulsory? Should our state outlaw fracking, etc.? You'll notice something common about these questions, and that is they all begin with should. And so should questions are the questions that are best designed for a structured academic controversy. Now you can use any number of materials to do a SAC. They just have some sort of setup. So I'm pointing you, if we were face-to-face, I would take you through a SAC activity. The full activity takes about 50 minutes to do. So it's a multi-staged activity. And so in short, students are presented with a should question, and they're seated in groups of 4, and the video will reinforce all of this. Everyone reads the background materials, and so that's what's provided with these materials. And then the group of 4 becomes 2 pairs. One pair is going to defend the yes position, and one pair is going to present the no position. And so then they each work with your partner to prepare a 2-minute presentation of the yes position, of the no position, and then with structure, you have them exchange those so that the yes gets 2 minutes to present to the no's get 2 minutes to present to the yeses. In the original structure, they then switch positions and so have to prepare new arguments for the side they just did not defend. Then you have a free-form small group discussion, and then it ends in a large group discussion about the issue. And so that was a lot, and as you can tell, it's many steps. But this, wrong direction. This deliberation, the bundle video has it all laid out for you. So if you are interested in this, go back there. So here's their video introducing you to this strategy.
All street law lessons are based on 2 basic ideas. Students talk themselves to understanding, and students should be doing the heavy intellectual lifting in class. When you observe a street law class, you should be able to observe these basic ideas in action. The deliberation discussion strategy is a powerful, interactive strategy to support civil discourse about contested public issues. To prepare for a deliberation, be sure to copy handouts A, B, C, and D for students. Additionally, be sure to copy the street law deliberation reading for the topic students will be discussing. You may also wish to provide students with a number of supplemental deliberation topic resources, including a glossary, visuals, quotes, social emotional learning supports, and other suggested resources. Desks should be arranged to accommodate students working in small cooperative groups, ideally of 4 and of no more than 6 to a group. A deliberation involves 8 steps. The first step is to introduce students to the deliberative process. Handout A supports this step, which will help students answer the questions: what is deliberation? Why do we deliberate? What is the process for a deliberation? And what norms should we follow? The next step is for students to carefully read the deliberation text. Each deliberation reading has been carefully constructed to provide balanced arguments. While reading, students should identify confusing terms and note interesting facts or ideas. The third step is clarification of the topic and reading. During this time, define and discuss important vocabulary terms as a whole class. If needed, ask clarifying questions to be sure students understand the main ideas from the text. Steps 4 through 6 are where students deliberate the question in small groups. During this time, if students have not already moved to small groups of 4 facing each other, they should move now. Once in their small groups, assign 2 students per group to take the yes side of the deliberation question first, and the other to take the no side of the deliberation question first.
If you're facing me, everybody wave if you're facing me. Hi. You're on the yes team, which means you're going to be arguing that voting should be compulsory in the United States. Okay, so now that brings us to our no team. Everyone facing away from me, stay facing away from me, but wave. Wave at the wall. Beautiful. Thank you very much. So you're all no's. Can you look at your partners and acknowledge that you're both no's?
In step 4, 2 of the 4 students work as a team to select the 2 most compelling reasons from the yes side of the deliberation reading. The other 2 students in the group work together to select the 2 most compelling reasons from the no side of the deliberation reading. When both sides are prepared, they share their 2 reasons with the other pair. Each pair should also record notes on handout B as the other side presents. For step 5, the pairs of students in small groups reverse position, with the yes side now becoming the no side, and the no side now becoming the yes side. In their new positions, each pair works together to select the one best reason they heard from the other pair, and also adds one additional compelling reason from the reading to support their new positions. When both sides are prepared, they share their reasons with the other pair and record notes. In step 6, the students drop their assigned roles and deliberate the question in their small groups. First, students should share their personal opinions about the deliberation question based on evidence and logic. Next, the group should search for possible areas of consensus, either on the deliberation question itself or on a topic related to the deliberation question that arose during the discussion. During this time, students can use handout C as a guide.
Can I get a couple of you to share your thoughts on compulsory voting and whether or not the United States should have compulsory voting?
Step 7 brings all small groups back together as a whole class to discuss the deliberation and gain deeper insight into the topic and the deliberative process. Finally, in step 8, students are given a few moments to quietly reflect individually on the process and provide feedback. Handout D supports this step in the process. Street Law has developed teaching materials along with topics.
Okay. Okay. So I can pause here. Any questions, clarifications from that video, or about how to do that, or experience with it, anything coming through?
Whenever it comes to resources, I always just wonder about differentiating it. If we're using something like Street Law, do they have kind of options for all different skill levels, or are there tricks for how we could accommodate certain students?
So this is, I know something that I'm actually working with them on a study of this deliberation strategy. And I know that the teachers that we're working with have asked for, I think there are 8th grade, I think there's a reading level differentiation that they either have or are about to have. And then what they recommend is it's perfectly okay to take all of Tuesday to go through and reinforce the readings, and then take Wednesday to do the deliberation strategies, right? So you can break it up and slow it down depending on who you have in the classroom. So if you have students that are, willing and able to do homework and are great independent readers, they can do the background reading as homework. They can do it in the first 10 minutes of class, or you can take as much time as you need to prep in advance of the deliberation. I know that the Constitutional Rights Foundation is another website. At the Constitutional Rights Foundation of Chicago, they also have some prepared materials on different issues and you can look them up as Structured Academic Controversies. And they have materials that are in Spanish, Spanish and English. So if that would be useful in your classroom, that's something else you could look into. And then you'll see different. If you search the Stanford History Group has some structured academic controversies that are based on primary sources, and I believe that they have high school level and 8th grade level and middle school level options as well.
Thank you.
Oh, Joe, you already taught structured academic controversy. Is that what's happening here?
Like I said, I used it. So David here in the video leads up the educational work at the Holocaust and Human Rights Center, which turns out those can sometimes be difficult conversations for people to have. And so we did do some work, and I've used in a couple different, with some of my teacher leaders, but then we did a session where we put together one of the more controversial issues in Maine's history around Malaga Island. And through the work with the Historical Society and State Museum, they pulled together the documents. And then we had at the Holocaust Human Rights Center, we had them participate in that as kind of a ready-made. And it was perfect timing because that very day before, we had a CS4 conference call with Dean Hess about this. And the question was, well, what can we do at our level? And she said, pick a state topic that they won't write, a national group won't do. I'm like, perfect, we're actually in the middle of doing that. So yes, there are some people in this room who have been exposed to some level of this.
Great, okay. Any other? So please feel free to interrupt or put those questions in the chat. But just to return, one reason I really like the structured academic controversy is that it sort of hits all of these good discussion points. It begins with a clear, discussable question, which is a policy question that generally begins with the word should. You start with shared material. So good discussions, again, don't happen when we just have people give their initial reactions to things. That students have to participate and talk to each other. They're required, you must talk with your partner now. That's part of the structure. You now must talk in the small group now. That's part of the structure. And you get full 100% participation. So every student in a structured academic controversy participates at about the exact same rate. And that's by design. And so it alleviates a lot of the concern that teachers have of like the student that talks too much, the student that doesn't talk at all. And you'll notice that the teacher is really just facilitating them through the activity. So this concern of where my own views fit on this, you can let them have more control of the discussion. And you become really the facilitator or the orchestrator of the activity. And the norms are inherent within the activity. So you set out at the beginning, these are the norms, and when I do them, I time it, like group A, you now have 2 minutes to present to group B, and all of the A's go at once, then all of the B's go at once. And so there's the structure provides a lot of the norm needs within it. And it's a way of teaching students what discussion is in the first place, right? So it helps them know when and how to participate. Okay. So the structures like this, I think, are just hugely important for alleviating a lot of our concerns around polarization, evidence, etc. So the more that we structure the activity and the discussion, it sounds like more, structure can sound like it's going to ruin the discussion, but I think structure done well actually allows actual discussion to happen.
Dr. McAvoy, before you move on to other resources, there's like 2 questions in the chat. One, have you ever had students create one? And then David wanted to know if you would talk a little bit more about the finding a common ground or reaching consensus.
Yeah, great. So I have students. I've had college students make them. So my pre-service teachers, I have them take an issue and in groups design, and it's kind of like doing a research project. So they have to write the background materials and the pro and the cons. And so it's partly showing, helping them do research. And I don't see why a high school student, you couldn't, rather than write a 10-page research paper, does anyone do that anymore? But I hope that you do. To have them instead write a nice, tight background sheet on this issue, and then write a pro and con, or find the good pro and con arguments, and then have them lead a structured academic controversy, would make their writing so authentic, right? Their peers are going to read what they wrote, and then you would see if the discussion goes well. I will say, with undergrad and graduate students, it takes a lot of scaffolding on my part to get the materials. So they submit drafts, and I have to give a lot of feedback on the materials, because I want them to have good discussions. So I need the materials to be good. The other thing to do with students is that you could have them just select find a newspaper article that you think provides good background on the issue, and then go to procon.org or some other site that gives you a pro and con. And so they could sort of build the elements of a structured academic controversy without having to write out the material, write it all out. So I would probably recommend that more for high school students. But if you had like an AP class and you were teaching argumentation, you might ask them to come up with the pro-con arguments. A more advanced SAC is that the readings I often use, it's like, this is the pro side and this is the con side. But you can give people just a piece of, a lot of material that's not sorted out in pro-con, but it has multiple and competing views within it. And then the kids have to sort of figure out what are the reasons we want to draw upon. So that's the more advanced version. And then the finding common ground part. So when the last stage, when they're in the 4, they drop their roles, they're in their small groups, and now you can have a free discussion on the central question. And so what I usually do is I might structure, so I've done, should voting be compulsory? So you could pose to this, let the groups sort of discuss free form what they think about that issue. And then you might, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, say, imagine that you have to make a recommendation to the federal government on how we should redesign voting in the United States. Would you support compulsory voting, or would you support something else? And a good structured academic controversy brings up a lot of issues, not just that they're more, there's some complexity in there, so there's more room for choosing something, kind of in the middle ground if they want to do that. So I usually pose a question that sort of invites them to come to a consensus point. Does that answer that question? And there's lots of, you can have people stand along a continuum at the end to talk about where their views are now. Some people don't like the consensus part and just want to leave it like, where are our differences? Okay, in the interest of time, let me just also point out some more resources for structuring discussions. Gosh, why does that keep happening? So Close Up Washington has a lot of materials around issues and different structures that you can use, and they've made a lot of them are many of them are they charge for, but they, in response to the COVID crisis, have made a lot more of their materials free to teachers. And so they do kind of they try to update, at least every couple weeks with current event issues and they're written for high school level summaries, and they're written, and then they have many activities and different structures that you can use in the classroom as well. I would just wanted to point this out. I don't know, this is a new organization, mismatch.org, which in your online, or for your face-to-face or online teaching, what they do is you register your class with Mismatch, and you say, my class basically lives in a conservative area and we would love to talk to a school in a liberal area. And so they match your students with different, people from around the country that live in a different political bubble or climate. And then there's structured discussions that you can engage your students with. So that's mismatch.org. many of you, Joe is nodding his head. He's familiar with Cult of Pedagogy, Jennifer Gonzalez. She has this big list of discussion strategies that I definitely point my student teachers to. She has, I think it's about 10 or 15 fishbowl discussions, pinwheel discussions, paired discussions. So there are all sorts of strategies that you can play with in your classroom. And I think, so this is, and they're kind of nicely described here. So if you just do a big list of discussion strategies, Cult of Pedagogy, you'll come to this page. And then this is a book that I don't know if you guys have encountered this, but I'm really liking this book called Making Thinking Visible. And all it is are structured activities around helping kids articulate, explain, work with ideas in small groups and larger groups. So there's structured academic controversy is in there, but there's all kinds of, they range from sort of quick and easy paired things to more complicated things like the structured academic controversy. And I've been requiring it in my methods classes, and it's been really great for them to, have a whole set of resources that they can, you can just open the book and start trying to figure out, start playing with a particular strategy. And then last, the Political Classroom has its own website, and in the additional resources tab here, we have a link to, it needs to be updated probably, but it has all sorts of resources, including things like procon.org, I Side With, and resources for getting kids engaged in issues discussions. So that's another one that you can use. And I'm going to, and we have some, Joe is also sharing some book resources. And the Cult of Pedagogy is there now for you to click on. Okay, so Jessica asks, are there resources to help kids know the differences between the political parties and various issues? So one, I haven't been to this in a little bit while, but I Side With is an interesting site that, and it's the letter I, because that's cooler. It's basically a survey that then, it's one of the surveys that helped you decide, are you a Democrat or Republican, but it tells you which political candidates you are most likely aligned to. So during a presidential election, for example, or during the primaries, it has like all the Democratic, everyone running, and you can answer all these questions, and it says, you're mostly aligned with Elizabeth Warren or something like that. So that's one option. I think it's, and others, feel free if you have a good resource for the things that you've used. Going to the party platforms and doing a comparison is what, they have all their issues there for the reading, and having students sort of present to each other what issue, everyone go look up what both parties say about X right now, and you can sort of share that out.
What I really like with the I Side With, for those who haven't used it, I'm seeing some people have, and this goes kind of back to, I think, Neil's just question about differentiation. Like I Side With, they have like really big buckets where you can answer these 10 or 15 questions, but then there'll be a question about like healthcare as a big bucket, and they'll ask like, do you want to go more? And there'll be like 40 questions just about healthcare, very, very specific policies. So you could have kids go really, really deep, or you could have kids just stay at that that upper level with it.
Yeah. I'm posting a link to this is a side note because I was thinking of it. I wrote up and collected a bunch of podcasts that explain the COVID pandemic, and in just different categories. And so I thought this is a nice resource for teachers. Joe, you already steal all my thunder, Joe.
It's funny, I clicked on the link to see what it was, and it came up as I already had it bookmarked. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think what you were just mentioning, Oh, the I side with stuff. Yeah, and it goes deeper. And one thing I'll just say is on the structured academic controversy part of my pitch, one thing I really like about it is that it slows down your judgment about an issue. So I think a lot of times we like to say to students, death penalty, what do you think? And it's like, well, I haven't thought much about it yet. Like, I need more information. So the structured academic controversy does not ask, what do you think, until the very end. So it takes students through a real inquiry investigation. Do we understand all the sides and elements and a lot of different angles about this issue? And eventually at the end, you can now state your opinion, but you don't lead with what's your opinion. So I say that because part of I side with, I get a little worried sometimes that we're asking kids to state their opinions and get a label before they've really investigated the issues yet. So maybe after you do a few issue investigations, you could go to I side with as well. Right? It is a cool website though, for sure. Okay, it is 3:13. I'm happy. Oh, yes, it does force you to see that. It being the SAC, I think, is that the structured academic forces you to also sometimes articulate the other side. It always asks, you have to articulate the other side, and this is a really important part of the activity, is that you actually have to, say the words that you might disagree with, and that's really, it's really a powerful thing to make one see the logic behind something that you initially disagree with. Okay, well, I am happy to hand it back to Joe. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with me, and I hope that this was helpful. And if you would like to leave in the chat with one thing that you're taking away, just because I like to know what sort of people find most meaningful, that would be really helpful to me.
So while you're doing that, please take a moment and what is your one big takeaway? And as always, I'll ask kind of one last call while we have Dr. McAvoy in the room. Here's your chance to ask the expert. Last call on any questions.
Okay, here's my question. I really want to have conversations in my classroom, and I like having the structure. I like there's a lot of great ideas. As I'm thinking about this, I can picture my students, who I will have again next year, sitting there just rolling their eyes. I teach 7th grade this year. They'll be 8th grade next year, so they'll be a little bit more mature. But how do this is dumb, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing, it's going to be dumb. So how do I get past that, or do I just jump in and do that? And I mean, that's what's stopping me is this handful of kids spread out through my classes that might just roll their eyes and just lean on their desk and make my day like, nah, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah. So it's sort of a buy-in question. How do you get everyone to buy in?
Yes, thank you.
And and I think that's a great question. And the way I think of that as a teacher is that I am from day one making it a normal expectation that you will talk in this class. And so I do that by, on the first day, we got to start learning names we got to make sure that everyone in the class on the first day of class has spoken to at least 2 other people in the room in a paired conversation and said something to the entire class. And if I were in a middle school class, we would be doing that for about a week. That I would be making sure those 2 things happen, that you're talking to 2 other people and you're saying something to the whole class. And in my college class, because I only see them once a week, where I do that, there's like, my first 3-hour session, there's a lot of mixing and, we're mixing it up. But the reason is that what happens in classrooms is that if you don't speak out loud in the first 3 days, you slowly begin to see yourself as someone who doesn't participate in this class. And then it becomes almost so much harder to get participation out of that person. And so, setting it up from day one, and then paired discussions are your friend, because it's very hard to not talk to the person. If you're turning and talking to somebody, it's really hard not to respond to that human. So low risk, easy, sort of get to know you paired discussions. How do you feel about discussions, normalizing that, helping meta talk about discussion. Do we think we just had a good discussion? What would make this discussion better if we did this fishbowl strategy or this structured academic controversy next time? So reflection on the discussion you just had. Having them evaluate themselves in discussion is a powerful thing. So like an exit ticket of how do you think did you follow the classroom norms today? Give yourself a one. So all of these things that you're saying to students, that discussion is an academic skill that we're working on in this classroom, and that it matters to me. And so mixing it up and strategizing. But I feel you with those middle schoolers.
Yeah, it's not like they don't want to talk, because they certainly let me know how they're feeling. This is
right.
Stupid. And again, it's only a couple of kids, but it's just like preventing me from going, because I have kids who want to, Ms. Abbott, we should debate. And I'm like, I don't want to get into, I can't, I don't know what that would look like. I think you guys would be all rah on this side and rah on that side. And
right.
I don't want that.
Yeah, so this is a scaffold, so the old backwards design, I know in a month, I want us to have, a more debate-like structure. What do I need to do to lead them up to that and you have to start building it in.
Okay, thank you.
I think, writing before you talk is helpful. So, and a lot of students, I think one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of kids, what discussion is I don't want to expose my own ignorance, right? So helping them feel prepared for the discussion by giving them the materials and preparation to so that we all, at least I feel like I know as much as everyone else right now, and I can hang in this discussion is important. But I think,
okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I'm now looking through our chat again. Street law. Oh, these are the takeaways, great, okay. Is there a question I'm missing, Joe?
Nope.
Great.
I was just gonna ask again, a last call, if anybody has anything for Dr. McAvoy. Well, let me then give you, we'll give some time for people to still put in their takeaways, because I know Dr. McAvoy, you said you'd like to read those, but I'd like to give you my formal thank you for giving up some time and coming in. As you may have known, again, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. I used your mandatory, should voting be mandatory presentation and the SAC, because I think it's just such good stuff, and that's one of those things we love to hear. So again, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with us.
Thank you. Thanks for using the stuff and for promoting it, spreading the word, Joe. Good to see you.